Imposter syndrome. Terrence, was it Zach or Terrence that you come up with it? Zach, you can go first.
What am I going first on?
Imposter syndrome. That was the topic that you suggested.
Oh, sorry, my Mississippi Wi-Fi kicked in for a second. I apologize. No, I think it's interesting going back to kind of what me and TK talked about earlier today, and looking at some other aspects. You get a lot of people that are really sure of themselves and give a lot of wholesale solutions, but there's not a lot of substance to what they do. And then you see a lot of practitioners in the field who do a really good job, but are always constantly kind of guessing what they're doing is wrong, and always second guessing. And the reality is they're doing a really good job in what they do. And I know TK is one of those guys too. I know he's confident in what he does, but it's interesting to think of. It's interesting to think about. And for me, it's just more so to know when is that actually going on, and like when is it actually somebody's just trying to sell a wholesale problem that nobody's asking for a solution to.
Nate Brookerson did that at the 2019 CVASPs. Like he did this huge ACL return to play presentation on a Power 5 basketball player, and basically just knocked it out of the park in terms of like all the metrics that you want to see go up. Some of them went up more slowly, and then some of them weren't as improved, but she still couldn't come back, and he was beating himself up. But it's like, hey, you tried to get like a female back from an ACL tear in 9 months, and there's going to be like a proprioceptive deficit for 2 years. And he was beating himself up about it. But you look at the level that he worked at, what he's done, where he's at now. That's exactly what you're talking about. But I talked about it to Pratiki Torch this week, because I think it's like, ironically, when you get to a certain level, or if you have a certain kind of like intellect or mindset, you have the self-awareness to question yourself. Whereas if you don't know what you don't know, you're just going to do it with 100% and not have the awareness or self-doubt to question yourself. And the person that's signing your paychecks doesn't know any better anyway. That's why I think it's like you get a lot of people that are successful in the field where you question it, but luckily for them, they don't question themselves, and nor does the person that's evaluating their performance. But I mean, we used to say in Argentina, be the duck. So it's like the surface of the water. It's like you're calm on top, fucking paddle like fuck underneath. That's why it can be deceptive. Some people will look completely calm, but then under the surface will doubt themselves. Every job I ever had, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to get exactly what I wanted out of the field. But long term, there was no doubt whatsoever. On a day-to-day basis, I used to question myself every single day. So it's like, the way that I've always tried to do it is, you can have a vision in your head of how it's supposed to look. Because what typically happens is, I don't know about you, when I go in, I'll have a vision of how it should look and where we want to be. And every day that you're not there, you're beating yourself up. But the reality is, you've been brought in not to be that. You've been brought in to be better than the other guy. And there's a lot of morons in the field. So the chances are you don't actually have to be amazing for you to deliver on what it is they've brought you in to do. And then it's just a case of like making your world small, breaking it down into little chunks, and just like one foot in front of the other. What's the most pressing thing that you can do today that's going to move you closer towards big picture? But every now and then, you fuck up.
Yeah, I know the other two guys got to go. I just think it's interesting because I know we talked about it. I think it might have been one of our cheeky episodes where I know our boy
this guy, bro,
Frank, keeps it above his desk, and I've been thinking about what if I'm wrong. My Mississippi Wi-Fi kicked in, definitely kicked in. But Frank's old adage of "What if I'm wrong?" I think at least the four of us and others we know and work with ask that question a lot.
It is a difference between, you're right. There's two ways to take that. One is, what if I'm wrong? And then you start to worry yourself about, what the cost of failure is going to be, or I'm going to get fired, I'm going to be ridiculed, blah, 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 blah. Or you can frame it as, what if I'm wrong? And then you start to take actions to ensure against the downside. Yeah. And do it anyway. There's a difference between accepting the fact that you're going to be wrong and trying to insure yourself against that versus thinking that you're going to be wrong and letting it paralyze you. Mm-hmm. I think that's the difference.
I noticed, I got from the Knowledge Project podcast, like that Shane Parrish one, but he had Maria Konnikova on, and she was like basically like a learn poker, a clinical psychologist, and like that. I read a book called The Biggest Bluff. Mm. There was some stuff she said in there that I thought like it really stuck with me. One of the bigger ones is like trialing your process and like developing a process, and then like putting it on trial and be willing to accept the fact that like if it's wrong, if the process fails, it's never be 100%. Going back and like having that iteration is something that like obviously people like Naval talk about all these things about having iterations with it. But I think always like putting that trial on process. Otherwise, if you never do, you're always gonna be sure that if it's that it's right. But you will never actually know because you haven't objectified it anyway. You haven't actually trialed it. You don't know if it's right. You don't know, okay, where have I messed up? Where am I gonna go back and fix it? And having that kind of foresight to be okay, if it is wrong, if I do put it on trial and it fails, where and when and how do I stop it from failing again? And I think you necessarily don't get I think it's easy to hide behind in strength conditioning, like things like mantras and like culture and mental toughness. It's easy to hide behind things that like are very cloudy, and that's what kind of holds up thinking anyway. Like personally, I think that's what holds a profession back. And you want to be respected, but it's like, well, if you want to be respected, then quantify your success, objectify your success, and like why are you successful? What makes strength coach A separate from strength coach B? Because they're both saying the same thing. Then like there's no differentiation between the two. And yeah, obviously we have questionable impact on wins and losses anyway. But if it's not about wins and losses, then how else are we objectifying our process if it's not wins and losses? Because everyone likes to say, Alabama has the best strength conditioning staff because they won this year. It's like, because you like the person who was there this year. But the person who won all the other years, no one in the field seemed to really like. But no, they didn't have the best strength staff then, but they won. So like you can't have fucking both ways. Like it's just so dumb if we don't objectify what they do and actually say like, is your shit actually working? Or are you just yelling and loud and you're the culture guy? If you're that guy, like that's who you are, or you're that girl, whatever, and like that's fine. That's like you're a cheerleader, that's cool. So but like you can't say you're that and then also be like, I'm a big part of this team winning.
Alabama just seem to attract a lot of people that are just naturally like that, and none of them are putting on an act. He's really like that. It's not an act, we promise. I'll say this too, right? It's good to have self-doubt, but it's not necessarily good to have outward-facing self-doubt. So, especially when you've got athletes that are dickheads. It doesn't really happen so much in college, but in the pros, some guys are just dickheads, especially when they're senior. They can smell it, and when they find an opening, they'll take advantage of it. So I think it's good. I'm trying to remember where I read it. It was like some finance guy, but it was like, strong opinions loosely held. So whatever the plan is, the way that you present it to the athletes, it has to be with confidence and conviction. Say, right, here's what we're going to do. That's not where the doubt is. The doubt is like internal or in the planning that you've done prior to that. And then obviously you're updating it with feedback and stuff, with information coming in. And then if new information comes in, you have to update the plan. That's cool. But then whatever you put out again, put it out with confidence. Doesn't mean you have to lie. Like I'm pretty open, or in the later years of my career, I was pretty open with athletes and be like, oh, I'm just trying this out because I think it's going to work.
Yeah, I said to players all the time. I'm like, it might. Oh, it's making me better. I'm like, it might. We're gonna try though.
Yeah.
Like, I can't.
Is that because you guys got more confident in what you were doing?
I think for me, like Zach said, you should be very suspicious of anyone that claims to have all the answers or a comprehensive solution. And I think, I mean, a lot of people didn't like my style because it's that, telling, especially in college, I was never really a tell athletes what to do coach. I was more like with the younger ones a little bit, but like with the older guys, it's, tell me what you want to do. Tell me how you want to modify this. What do you think? And getting their input. And I think those athletes especially will probably have an easier time believing that you're authentic if you don't claim to have all the answers. I think anyone who says they are or says that they do have all the answers is a bullshitter or is a moron. And it's pretty easy to sniff those two things out if you've been in the college system for 4 or 5 years.
I think for me, it probably just came with just like there's more confidence in general. Like I think as you coach more and more, I think as you experience different environments, I would say I was probably more that way with baseball. I've been more way with soccer because of like that professional sport environment, as opposed to I was not as much of that way with like Richmond, like working in rugby, just because you have a bit more bravado about yourself in those environments because you're dealing with a bunch of grown men. Most of them at that time, especially, were older than me. Way bigger, way stronger. So you need to be a bit more of like, you kind of have to be more of a dick, and just be like, no, this is what we're fucking doing today because I said so. Like, and that's kind of what it is. And then like, but it's always that push pull. You're not like that with every player. And with some players, you can't say to them like, hey, we're trying this. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll go back and change it. Try something else. So some of it's gonna be environment. Like I'm sure, like the way maybe Kieran and I are with players a lot of times. Like Zach can't be that way with his group at Ole Miss. Like there might need to be more dictatorial, more like a parent in those situations, or like a harsh uncle. And there are some guys who earn the right to get more input, and there are some guys, a lot of them who are gonna be like never gonna have that responsibility because they can't be trusted with it. And you gotta be more like, no, this is what you're fucking doing because I said so.
Right, this is gonna surprise you. I got in trouble with the administration once. A nameless institution. However, when I was there, there was an email sent, which was, so what was happening was there was a field hockey camp going on alongside. Was this when you were there, JJ?
Yeah.
Whatever.
I know the story.
Yeah, there was a field hockey camp going alongside the turf where we were running tempo. And there's balls. It was like 3 field hockey games. I'm like, oh, right, we don't want to interrupt the field hockey camp. So we lined up all the boys and we're like, does everyone see what's going on over there? And they're like, yeah, it's field hockey camp. I'm like, right, if a ball comes over, what do you do? We want out of the way of it. It's like, right, make sure you don't get hurt, yeah? Yeah. And then all the interns went over there to make sure the balls didn't do anything. Up and down running tempo. Obviously, it goes without a hitch. And I got an email at the end of the day. It's probably like 6 hours later about the gross negligence I'd exposed the football athletes to, because they could have been injured by a flying hockey ball, and it was only through the careful diligence of the field hockey coach that the football athletes remained safe. And I was like, 1, they fucking run into each other as hard as possible, multiple times a week. 2, we trust them to drive 4,000-pound vehicles to the fucking facility. And 3, they can go get shot in the face for their country right now. They can navigate a fucking hockey ball. I think we may be getting this out of proportion. And she fucking replied all to me, athletic director, head football coach. Oh, yeah, she never had any imposter syndrome. JJ, talk to me about imposter syndrome, bro.
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to say anything that you guys haven't covered. You know, well, we had a conversation in Weebs. It was last week about the duck. And then I think
That was me. Was that me thinking the course wasn't going to sell?
yeah. And I was just like,
Segue.
again, like you talked
That
about.
was your opportunity to plug it, JJ.
Shit. Go by Strength Coach Network fundamentals.
Some bio on your Instagram.
So it's on my Twitter. It's not my Instagram. It's on my Twitter.
Let's get you paid.
Link to buy my Instagram and Twitter. Let's go ahead.
Is first going to flash up now, right?
Yep. Just my code.
Yeah. You paid, bro. Some of the finest memery and shit posting in strength and conditioning. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And then I think we talked about there's a few. Maybe it's on one of the Q&As, members Q&As. Check them out. Sign up. Again, Strength Coach Network. Someone asked you about it, didn't they? And they were like, I think your response was just like, "You're gonna die. Don't worry." And yes, you know, tongue in cheek and all that, but also not. But as long as you don't go through, you know, gross negligence in what you're doing, i.e., just not care.
Cripple doing off screen.
As long as you just don't not care about things, and you know, like you guys have said, if you're good enough field, you're not going to be like that. Then you should have the confidence just to back yourself. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen out of this? And then, okay, I've learned something new here. Iterate, update, do it again.
Worst things happen is you know, name an athlete. There's some kind of you know, personal scandal. You just go get a job consulting for an equipment company. Big deal. Are you having a disco at your place, Zach? What's all this lights going on in your thing, bro?
It's my reading light, asshole. Because I'm fucking crippled now. So I need what?
Read?
I read. I don't know. I read help ads.
What you been reading, bro?
Actually, per one of our last cheekies, I've been reading Top Dog.
How far do you get to?
As of today, and also reading Maslow's course.
Oh yeah. You know what I found interesting about that book is that I forget the number of parachute jumps, but it's like basically if you throw somebody out of an airplane, the heart rate's like 180 beats a minute. And that's an experiment where they just like get back in the plane, go out again, get back in the plane, go out again, and they just keep doing it again and again. Is it 3? Yeah, by 3 parachute jumps, they're back down to resting heart rate. That's the
my mom's taught Airborne School. She said she doesn't. She said like jump out of an airplane and helicopters is nothing now.
Yeah.
So I still have the kid grown men out of it. It's whatever. Like you just.
That's why.
It jets. It comes. Parachute comes out in 3 seconds. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And I tried to talk her into going skydiving with me, and she's like, "Why would I do that?" I was like, oh, "My bad." All right.
But that's like with the mental toughness, it's like people always, you know, I've never met an athlete yet, barring a couple of superstars, where they're like, "Oh, I wish I'd been more aroused on the biggest stage. You know, I was too relaxed. I was too chill." I've worked with a couple that actually, the bigger the stage, the better they played. But for that reason, on the regular games, they weren't actually as good. Like Juan Fernandez Lobe, bro, the bigger the occasion, the more that motherfucker played. And then some of the games, you just be like, are you ready to retire?
That's because that guy had limbs hanging off and stuff by the end of his career.
Bro, he couldn't straighten his arm by the end of his career. But yeah, like, it's just exposure.
Yeah.
That's like, it's not that you need a big speech or, you know, you need like mental toughness training or shit like that. It's just like you just need to be in those situations more. The biggest example we ever had of that at William & Mary was the first time Mike Tomlin had come back to campus. We played JMU at home. Mike Tomlin comes in the locker room, gives the talk, and boys are going fucking nuts. And we went out and they put 50 on us. So we came in on a Sunday. I was like, right, we just had a speech from a Super Bowl winning head coach. I was like, did it help us? They're like, no. I was like, right, maybe it's just we need to be better at football.
It's just
didn't make us popular. I mean, like Scott was like, yep, didn't make us popular.
Well, it's like you talk about, and even just on the reason why I was going to bring up the top dog is even I was actually going to talk about the jumpers, where like they basically did by the third jump, they were basically back down to wrestling hard levels, and they compared it to the professional dancers, and they basically grouped dancers into 3 groups, basically like the elite, above average, and average dancers, or sub-elite, whatever you want to group it up. And basically like their baseline levels of like a stress from their saliva test were like no different from their other counterparts based on like performance or anything else like that. Like it's still the stress of competition is the stress of competition, and it can't be replaced unless it's just by pure exposure and experience. Almost as of the issues we go through, stress we go through is task specific, so to speak.
Yeah, there's it's that book again where they talk about the penalty shootouts. So it's like the interesting thing about penalty, maybe you're not ready yet, but the interesting thing about penalty shootouts is they have these different scenarios, because obviously the way that it works is there's going to be an event in that penalty shootout where you're kicking to win, i.e., you're going first, you're kicking to win, or you're kicking to not lose because the other team scored a goal and you need to match. So even though if you look at the task constraints, if you look at the physical task demands, it's identical. Even like psychoperceptually, it's identical. The only thing that changes is the weight that you put on it in your mind. And then obviously I think it's a huge drop off of like when you're kicking to win, your success rate is like way higher. And when you're kicking to not lose, people shit the bed. And it's not because the task is any different. It's because of the weight that you put on it mentally. And that was like another thing. The rugby championship, the first 3 years, we fucking sucked. Like, we're playing Australia. We're playing New Zealand. We're playing South Africa. And we played them twice a year, every year. So we played 6 games. And we went 0-17. And on the 18th one, everybody calmed down enough that we're like, right, are we going to fucking win a game or what? And it just takes exposure. That's the biggest thing, I think, that when did they beat New Zealand? Last year. Took them all those years to beat New Zealand. It's the only team they never beat. They beat them last year, and it was just because repeated exposure. Wasn't professionalism, wasn't strength and conditioning, anything like that. Because I can tell you the strength and conditioning was better 5 years ago, but exposure.
You know what was interesting about that is they didn't play, obviously, for like however long it was. It was months, wasn't it? It was like 8 months or something. They hadn't played a single game. But then you get to
Park, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then you get to like England with the Saracens players. They don't play well. And then suddenly the argument is, but they're not playing, that's why they didn't play well. Yeah. It's like, well, 4 months ago, Argentina beat the best team in the world from not playing. Emotion.
Those games to the Saracens players, as much as they wouldn't admit it, don't mean anything. Whereas
playing champ rugby games,
like you give Argentinian players any kind of emotional angle to work themselves up, they'll fucking milk it. That was the problem with the first 2 years. It was like, it's like tappers used to say to me. It's like whatever your biggest strength is becomes your biggest weakness. Their biggest strength is they're emotional, they're passionate, and all that kind of shit. But the thing is, you can't do that every week because it just kills you. And 2, you if you're always doing that, you're never actually working on the stuff that underpins it. It's like cool running.
So do you think that's where football sits too far aside of?
Oh yeah, terrible. It's John Danaher, his interview on Joe Rogan and Gordon Ryan, they probably have the most fucking dominant jiu-jitsu team, and he's the individual, jiu-jitsu competitor right now, probably the best he's ever been in no gi. And bro, some of his stuff, I think it's because he's a PhD in philosophy as well. He did his PhD at Columbia. So he's, pardon me?
John Danaher.
Danaher Death Squad. And yeah, TK got me a book as well about all this stuff.
Yeah, I said, bro, myself.
Danaher.
Yeah.
But he has his podcast episode on Joe Rogan is really good. Those the real one's kind of shit, but the Joe Rogan one's good.
But like Gordon Ryan is so good. Like he's been training 10 years.
10 years.
10 years. He got his black belt after 5. He's got so good now to the point that he's going against other black belts that have been black belts longer than he's been training. And he's like the other week, he wrote down in advance, here's what I'm going to beat him with and when, folded it in an envelope and handed it to the commentator, and he fucking did it. And like he made his name coming up doing like cash matches. Like he'd, bring in 10 grand, the other guy brings in 10 grand. And then he'd add extra wages to like about what minute he was going to finish guys. And the big thing, if there's a clip somewhere, John Danaher talks about it, which is he talks about the high rise, like the tightrope guy. When he was in New Zealand, he was at school and they had like some circus performers come in, and they had this like tightrope guy, and they were like, "Well, how do you do it?" And he goes, "Oh, well, if I took that tightrope and I put it down on the floor, who here thinks that they could walk across it?" And everyone puts their hands up. And he's like, "Right, if I lifted it up, who thinks they could walk across it?" And everyone put their hand down. He goes, "Oh, but it's the same thing. It's just the consequences are higher, and it's how you interpret it." So it's like the penalty stuff. It's the same thing. When you play New Zealand, it's the same thing. It's what you do to yourself mentally. That was like, for me, getting a job in strength and conditioning. When I got an internship with Wasps, I've failed 6 interviews at that point. Didn't give a fuck. I just gave up giving a fuck. Andy Murray, how many years did he have to lose before he won Wimbledon?
Mm.
And that's the interesting thing, because I've thought about this. I used to think about this all the time in Japan because the arguments I used to have. If you have that, if you say, right, if you accept that's the reality of mental toughness, exposure, all that kind of stuff, how do you then get that exposure?
Yeah, because then I was gonna ask you. So like, I think I've been there when David Coughlin, Dr. Skillak, came and presented at school, and he was like, with penalties, what they do in the team is to up the pressure. Okay, if you miss, one of the boys gets your phone for 5 minutes, and they get to do whatever they want on your mobile phone. And he said, literally, it would just like the pressure boys would go through the roof, because they'd be going fucking hell. But then, does that equate to the same, or do you think that equates to the same thing?
It's tough, man. It's tough. I think it's a very good question, because obviously it's like, in a way, they know. Do you know what I mean? It's like try and create all this pressure, and it's still. I think it's just exposure. You just have to keep getting back on the horse.
It's like that. So we said elite professional boxers, barring Deontay Wilder, like an outlier, but you say like Vasily Lomachenko, the person who beat him recently a couple months ago, I can't remember his name, Lopez. Like, look at the amateur records. It's like, I think Vasily Lomachenko had almost 200 amateur fights. Like, and it was just a matter of just repetition. Like, it's just reps. It's just seeing exposure and exposure to so many variables and so many chances that By the time we get in an actual professional fight, it's like he's seen it literally over 100 times. I think there was actually a Joe Rogan podcast with Yoel Romero. He's talking about when he was in Cuba and being in wrestling, and it's a bit kind of almost like Top Dog because it was just pure competition.
Like, like you got, if you won, you got.
Yeah.
If you didn't, you didn't.
And so the food, even like the quantity and the quality of food was tiered based on your success as a wrestler.
She's not very socialist.
Yeah. And we're just saying, it's like every day it's like people, he used the word kill, but it's not what he meant was kill. It was like someone trying to beat you every day because they literally, they want 3 eggs instead of 2 and shit like that. It was like literally a matter of constant stress and isolation. There's constant competition because their training is just wrestling. They just constantly wrestle all the time.
That's why I find it curious about him as well, that people said, he has no gas tank. It's like, how can you be a fucking Olympic finalist in freestyle wrestling and somebody said you have no conditioning?
Different, more variables though.
Yeah.
The one thing I had to respond. But somewhat such an analogy too, like when I was training the fighters and the boxers, it was like they all of them would say, I can never do that rugby shit. Like, fuck that was insane. I'm like, you punch in the face for a living. Like you actively get kicked in the head. I watched you choke a man unconscious. What are you saying? You couldn't get tackled and reset a ball for 80 minutes. But it's still like two opposite ends of the spectrum. But like I could never do that.
Going back to that mental toughness thing, if you listen to Andrew Huberman, he's the head of the neuroscience lab at Stanford, and he does like a lot of stuff about stress and decision making and stuff like that. He was on the Lex Friedman podcast, and I listened to that. And that one thing that I have changed my mind on a little bit, which is when, in my mind, it's like, oh, you get too aroused, you go off the cliff, and that's it. But he, does stuff with the military and people in war zones and stuff like that. But it's like you get pushed off the cliff, you go down, and then it's like when your brain's like, fuck, I really am about to die. That's when you get like an extra, it just goes next level, and you get like the fucking Matrix where things start to slow down, apparently. So it's like you get that like 1,000-yard stare, time slows down, all your senses are attuned, stuff like that. It was pretty interesting, but obviously I think you're never going to get that in a regular team sport. I think maybe you might get it in combat sports, but pretty intense.
The super compensation of stress.
Yeah. Have you read why zebras don't go? Zebras.
I haven't, but I'm familiar with it.
It's a good book.
Game changer. Absolute game changer.
His lectures are on YouTube as well.
Yeah, I saw it. The Boston Sports Medicine.
Sure.
Yeah, me and Jason.
I think that was I think early in my career, that was probably the first non-true S&C book that I read. It was probably just because Buddy Morris talked about it in a presentation I saw. Or maybe an article on Elite FTS. Huh?
I got it from Mark McLaughlin.
Yeah, that's what I got it from. I know it was a buddy of mine. It was one of that, but it was the first like non-S&C book that I like read like early on in my career. And I was like, I'm an idiot.
Bro, I mean, the thing about that book is it's so it's just foundational. Like the strength coach that doesn't understand stress doesn't understand training. When your job is training, your job is stress.
Where can they learn more about stress, Keir?
Sorry?
Where can they learn more about stress? Strength coaches?
Fundamentals course, link in bio, coming up on screen now. And when you sign up for Strength Coach Network Fundamentals, you're also going to get an offer, new members only, to join Strength Coach Network for a year at $100 off the listed price, which, quite frankly, I'm giving it away. And on that note, what a perfect time to wind up, JJ.
Team Builder?
Oh, yeah, buy Team Builder.
Go buy Team Builder.
Yeah.
Use the link in my bio. Don't use everybody else's bio.
Hey, your boy's got to pay rent. Fuck you, TK.
Well, actually, when they sign up through Strength Coach,
these burnt ends are going to buy themselves.
You're offering, so sign up through Strength Coach Network.